Hey guys, let's talk about crepe myrtles for a little while. So this time of the year, specifically here in the Shreveport-Bossier area, it's time to trim crepe myrtles. So the window for trimming them generally starts towards the end of December and goes all the way through February. So the most important thing you want to make sure is that they're fully dormant. You can see all these behind us. There's not any leaves on them. They look brown and dead, so they're perfect. The tree's dormant. You don't really want to trim them with leaves on them still. So now that we've got that out of the way, we know when. We also need to establish the fact first that not all crepe, just because you have a crepe myrtle doesn't mean that you need to trim it. So specifically, crepe myrtles are trimmed if they're up against the house and they're getting on the house. That's a good time to trim them. If you've got them in the landscape and you want to keep them at a certain height, or maybe you want to train the head of the canopy of the tree, that's a good time to trim them. If you've got one that's out in the open and you're not concerned about height and you're not concerned about other things like that, obstructions in the power lines and whatnot, there's nothing that says you have to trim them. Crepe myrtles are trimmed because you want that manicured look. You want them to remain a part of the landscape. You can see all these behind us. It would be odd if these trees were allowed to get 30, 40 feet tall. So that's why we're going to choose to trim them. So once you've established the fact that whether or not you do or don't, we need to talk about what to do and what not to do. So if you're not going to trim the crepe myrtles, generally speaking, you can see Rico right now, he's pulling a lot of the smaller branches off. They've all got little sucker branches, and they'll get sucker branches that grow on these lower areas. So even if you're not going to trim them, it's a good idea to go out there and maybe to kind of hand prune very few selective branches, just to kind of get rid of them, just because they're unsightly. This right here is an example of a completely trimmed crepe myrtle. What's really important to remember is that you want to leave yourself plenty of branch. You want to leave plenty of growth for new growth to grow on, and that's what these limbs are. You don't want to come down here and nub it down real close, because what's going to happen is you're going to start getting a real big clustered knotted up look. Some people call it like an elephant's foot. We'll show you some footage of those. They're really easy to spot. The most of the times you see those when people come through here with a chainsaw and they just chainsaw the tops of them out. Do not do that. That's crepe murder. That's leave them alone if you're going to do that. So leave yourself a good at least 12 up to 24 inches of the actual limb. You can see how he's making some of these selective cuts right here. We're just cutting the tops of the canopy out. If we were going to have a crepe myrtle that we wanted to bring back down to height, we could come back down here and we could make some selective cuts here. The one big thing that you're trying to avoid though is when you get into these areas right here, you don't want to make cuts where you have branches. These are actually some old crepe myrtles. You can see these big knots right here. So since we've started taking over these crepe myrtles, we tried to kind of help these grow out of it. So you can see that's what was happening to this tree. That's where this knot's from. This tree was cut in the same place every year, year after year. That's what you're trying to avoid. So once you've established where you're going to make your cuts, just like he's doing, it's just a simple angle cut. Most people can use some big loppers, some bypass pruners. If you've got smaller crepe myrtle, you can just use a little small set of hand shears. And all you do is you just make that angled cut, leave yourself plenty of room, throw the debris. That's something else we need to talk about. Crepe myrtles are going to create a lot of debris, so just be prepared. You're going to need a truck or a trailer or something of that nature, depending on how many you've got, because you're going to have a lot of waste left over. Another advantage to trimming your crepe myrtles, specifically in our area, is you can see these have got a little bit of scale. If your crepe myrtles are infested in scale, it might be a good idea to consider trimming them, simply because whenever you go in there and remove that branch that is infected, you're also going to be removing the actual crepe myrtle, or the actual scale from the crepe myrtle. And then this spring, go ahead and spray it. You'll kind of be that much further ahead of the game. But anyway, I hope this helps. Crepe myrtles are gorgeous. It's something that definitely needs to be done. It just needs to be done right. If y'all got any questions, just let us know. We look forward to hearing from you. So this is an example of what we're talking about, the long-term results of actual crepe murder. You can see where this tree has been cut in the same place year after year, and you start to get this head that forms. You start to get this big knot, if you will, of the limbs. So this particular look right here, all this, it's going to be really hard to fix this or to grow out of this. You almost would need to come and make a single flat cut under it and then not trim the tree for several years. What you would do is you would allow it to grow some of these larger limbs like this, and you would just have to make your cuts up high. And over time, as the actual trunk of the tree starts to grow back out and fill back in, it'll kind of try to catch back up. But long term, once you start getting this knuckled look and you start getting this deformed look, you're going to have it forever, and the overall look of the tree is going to take years and years and years to fix. So this is an example of what not to do. This is crepe murder.